Hello and welcome to Connected with Latham, where we discuss ideas, legal developments, and business trends shaping the global economy. This is the 9th episode of the Latham & Watkins Drug Pricing Series, and I'm Chris Schott, a partner in the healthcare and life sciences practice in our Washington, D.C. office. I focus my practice on all things market access, and that includes manufacturer compliance related to the Medicaid Drug Rebate Program, Medicare, and the 340B Drug Pricing Program, as well as, of course, implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. Joining me today are Danny Machado and Elisabeth Crusey, associates in our Washington, D.C. office.
Hi, Chris. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here with you and Danny on this episode of the podcast.
Thank you, and thank you for joining the podcast today. In each episode, we focus on a specific drug pricing topic, and after discussing the substance, we ask the question, which Olympic sport is it like? And we have the list of Olympic sports ready to go to see which most resembles the topic in terms of strategy, complexity, or frankly, level of conflict. So Danny, what is our topic for today?
Today, we're here to talk about the Pricing and Contracting USA conference that we just concluded in New Orleans. This is one of the two major drug pricing conferences that takes place in the US each year. The next one, as we all know, is going to take place in Chicago, the MDRP conference in September, and we're all really excited to go there and to see some of you. And today we just want to talk about some of the topics that came up at the conference, some of the hot things going on in the world of price reporting.
Yeah, so let's get into some of the topics. We have to start, as it can't be any other way, with 340B, of course, the perennial hot topic. There was actually some good news. Our client, United Therapeutics, received a favorable opinion in the DC Circuit Court supporting manufacturer limitations on contract pharmacies in the US. And so this opinion talks about the 340B pricing offer that manufacturers have to make and holds essentially that it is permissible to put certain limitations on that offer. So this opinion was long in coming. We had waited for it for quite some time, and we're happy that it came out just in time to talk about it with people at the conference.
That's great news, Chris, on that decision. However, 340B litigation is certainly not over. In fact, many states are stepping up and making contract pharmacy requirements binding on manufacturers in ways that are arguably beyond what the federal government requires. Pharma has filed various preemption challenges in these instances, so it'll be interesting to track these and see how it all turns out.
That's a great point, Elisabeth. And since we're on the topic of talking about states and how they're getting involved in all of this stuff, we heard from the directors of the prescription drug affordability boards for both Colorado and Maryland. And it's just interesting to note that states are moving from the transparency angle that they had been focusing on before to actually imposing drug price controls in their states. Maryland, for instance, their PDAB was created in 2019, and earlier this month, they announced 6 drugs that they would like to move forward on. And the next step there is a report on how to conceptualize the upper payment limit, which would be the maximum that the state would pay. It's interesting to think about the connection between these state PDAB programs and the federal level of price controls, like the IRA. More and more states are trying to get into what we would think of as a federal sandbox, right? The IRA itself instituted what are called, quote unquote, maximum fair prices or maximum prices for selected drugs. So we wonder what would be the impact on the PDABs. Might the states, for instance, try to borrow the MFP that comes from the IRA and set it as their own upper payment limit?
Yeah, and of course, IRA implementation was a key topic at this conference. We just received from the government draft guidance earlier in the month, I believe, that discusses the initial price applicability year 2027. So there is final guidance for 2026. And this is the draft or proposed guidance that CMS issued, which addresses 2027. Elisabeth, what can you tell us about that guidance?
Yeah, Chris, comments on this are due on July 2nd of this year. And there's not only focus for this guidance on 2027, but also on the maximum fair price or MFP implementation for 2026, which involves the Medicare Transaction Facilitator or MTF, a new entity that CMS will set up or established through contracting with a provider. So there were quite a few topics of note in this past draft guidance.
Yeah, so it's very interesting that obviously when 2026 was on the horizon, CMS focused in that guidance on drug selection, drug definition. Now they have a little bit more breathing room. So as part of this 2027 guidance, they're sort of backfilling and going back and looking at 2026 and how the MFP, the max fair price, will actually be implemented. You mentioned the MTF, the Medicare Transaction Facilitator. if you read that guidance, obviously IRA is a step in the direction of much more government involvement in the pharmaceutical industry. And the MTF, I think, is a key, light in that area. The MTF is supposed to exchange data between the pharmacy, the plan, the manufacturer. But not only that, at least one of the proposals here in the guidance is that the MTF will then also handle financial transactions. So a lot to read there, a couple of dense pages in that guidance, and it's really an indicator how much of a change IRA might bring to us here. With the government really stepping up. That kind of takes me to a few conceptual points. A lot of speakers mentioned IRA, a lot of speakers mentioned state efforts to get involved in the drug pricing scheme. And one question kind of is, what are the action items here for manufacturers? We as an industry, what can we do in this environment? And so I would say there are 4 key action points that I certainly mentioned at the conference. In my panel, I believe others said similar things. And the first one is take advantage of comment opportunities and engage with the government. So Elisabeth, you mentioned the comment deadline on this guidance is July the 2nd. Even if you don't have a drug on the list for 2026 and you don't think you will be on the list for 2027, this guidance is setting the groundwork for how it'll operate for years to come. So action point number 1 would definitely be take advantage of opportunities to comment. Second point that I would make is tell the story. Pharma companies are in business to provide cures and therapies to patients, and that is a point much too often lost. And so moments such as this conference are good opportunities to remind ourselves that's what we're all about. And that is a message we need to carry out into the public, and that happens way too little. Which dovetails with the third point I would make, which is educate folks on how pricing works. I think nobody really understands out there in the public what happens between a list price set by the manufacturer and an end customer price at the pharmacy. A lot goes on with that, and it's not sexy and fun to talk about. But if we don't somehow at least educate on some of the basic points, the discussion around the pharma industry will always be skewed and not really reflect reality. And then the final point, we've heard about the United Therapeutics victory. There were some other positive decisions. Similarly, we should not hesitate to go and defend our rights. So I think the days might be over where cooperation is the pathway to success. We should certainly try that, right? Which is why the call to action number 1 was use comment opportunities, engage with government. But if that fails, and if rights are being infringed upon, there's really nothing else to do except go to court and fight for the rights that are being impinged upon. So in the past, at some of these conferences, there were speakers from CMS or from HRSA. That has dwindled down a little bit in the recent years, which with government seemingly being a little reluctant to appear, probably because there's a lot of rulemaking and such going on. But there were a couple of state speakers. So Danny mentioned initiatives from the states, and we also had a speaker from OIG. So Elisabeth, what did the OIG representative discuss at the conference?
The OIG representative gave a discussion about OIG's role in AMP and ASP substitution. As a little background on this, when Congress established the average sales price, or ASP, as the basis for reimbursement of Medicare Part B drugs, it tasked OIG with monitoring market prices. OIG compares average sales prices reported under Medicare with average manufacturer prices that are reported under Medicaid. And if OIG finds that the average sales price for a drug exceeds the average manufacturer's price by 5%, CMS will then substitute the average sales price-based payment with the lower rate.
So really what's happening is, right, there are a couple of other criteria to be met, but essentially if for a particular code, the ASP-based reimbursement it exceeds AMP by a certain threshold for a certain period of time, then CMS can swap out the ASP-based payment rate for an AMP-based payment rate.
So we heard from OIG social science analyst, and the discussion basically was, CMS instituted this policy back in 2013. Since then, what has been the result? CMS implemented the price substitutions for about 68 drugs based on OIG's analysis, and the total savings to Medicare has been $73 million. Even the OIG analyst admitted that this was not a huge amount, but it was still an amount significant, at least for the Medicare program.
Yeah, so we had an OIG speaker, and it's interesting to hear about this ongoing effort that they have underway, but nothing really new came out in terms of IRA implementation or anything of that sort. So I think the last major topic that we want to raise here is the Medicaid proposed rule that came out last year. And it is still posted on the OMB website with an action date of June. So maybe by the time you hear this, it's possible the regulation could have been issued. But the one key point about it that was discussed at the conference is a CMS announcement, where CMS issued a statement basically saying that one of the most controversial proposals in that proposed regulation would be pulled back. And Danny, why don't you tell us what that proposal was all about?
Sure. Yeah, that would have been the best price stacking provision, which had rattled a lot of manufacturers. This would have been an approach that would have required stacking across different customers, and it is sometimes referred to as the follow the pill approach.
Yeah, that would have been a major departure from how best price has been interpreted for a number of decades. So CMS in its statement didn't say it would abandon this proposal. It basically said it would hold back that proposal from the final rule and collect more input or more comments on that. So that sounds like what we might be seeing here at some point is a final rule with comment period, with things being finalized except for this best price stacking proposal. And on that, there would be a further comment period. It's kind of reminiscent of the 2016 final rule, which also came out as a final rule with comment period. And the piece they had left open there was, of course, the line extension definition. So this kind of links back to the importance of one of the 4 action or calls to actions that I mentioned, which is engage with the government and provide comments, and maybe also not be shy when it comes time to litigating for our rights. We, of course, don't know what happened behind the scenes, but it would not be that hard to suppose that one of the reasons why CMS decided to hold off on this proposal is because of the significant blowback. And we certainly drafted some comment letters. I'm sure there were many others. And my guess is the best price stacking approach, because it would have been so disruptive to the industry in a negative fashion, was probably a highlight in most of these comments. So again, we don't know why, but it stands to reason that one of the causes for CMS to pull that back was the stakeholder input and the stakeholder involvement. So definitely one of the key takeaways is if there is an opportunity to comment, and even if it's just the Paperwork Reduction Act notice that opens the door for sending comments, it is usually worthwhile to spend the effort and send in comments just to make sure that the viewpoints are at some point heard and considered. So I think that takes us through the key topics that we wanted to flag from this conference. As Danny mentioned, hopefully we'll see you all in Chicago in September for the other major conference of the year. And of course, that takes us to the question we had posed at the beginning: which Olympic sport is it like? So Danny, why don't you go first and tell us what you think?
Yeah, this makes me think of weightlifting, honestly. Between the IRA, the 340B pressures, states now making contract pharmacies mandatory, state PDABs, thinking about the high costs involved in the drug research process, coupled with all these added regulatory pressures. It's like adding heavier weights to the bar. There may be a point where it may become just so heavy that drug research is just not able to push that weight any longer. And that would not be a good result for medicine innovation in the United States.
Yeah, that was definitely an underlying theme, is that the burdens and requirements are increasing over time. They certainly have increased significantly in the last couple of years. Elisabeth, what did you pick as an Olympic sport?
That's a great sport, Danny, and a great analogy for our discussion today. I think our discussion today made me think of curling for a few different reasons. First off, at a conference, it is fun to see everybody working together to kind of achieve this common goal and understanding of these changes in the industry. And curling's historical nickname is also the roaring game, which apparently originates from the rumbling sound that granite makes as it goes across the ice. And that reminds me of a lot of these challenges we're seeing against states and the government, in light of some of these restrictions, and also lines up with your comments today of encouraging manufacturers and industry to really take a stand against, restrictions like this.
Excellent. Yes. And we certainly are increasing our efforts to try to make those stones slide a little further. That's for sure. Well, I picked sailing, and I picked that because on the one hand, it deals with forces of nature, trying to harness them, but also survive them, which is sort of what we do with the science, right? We're trying to harness the scientific process to come up with a good response, but there's blowback. There's blowback just in the difficulty of developing drugs. But then also there are the other boats trying to get ahead of you. And if the rules of the game are set up in a way that makes it very difficult to navigate, that certainly makes it hard to have progress. So sailing for me was the combination of fighting the forces of nature to have a benefit, but then also having to deal with rules to try to win the race or get ahead. New Orleans, where this conference took place, of course, is famous for many things. One is its food, and I'm happy to ask Danny, give us a nice restaurant in New Orleans. Which one stood out for you?
Yes, I've been looking at one called Vyons, and it's spelled Vyones. Apparently, they have amazing New Orleans style food, but one of the things that caught my eye is that they have an award-winning French onion soup. So I think I would like to go try it.
Yeah, I will add that they also have a pork chop, which definitely now has won my award. So it's definitely a great place to visit. Thanks to Danny and Elisabeth for joining the podcast today.
Thanks both for having me to talk about these important issues.
Yeah, very fun to talk about drug pricing issues as always. Thanks, Chris.
And thank you to our listeners for checking out the Latham & Watkins drug pricing series, which is part of our Connected with Latham podcast. You can subscribe and listen to new and archived episodes of Latham's podcast on lw.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. If you have questions or would like additional information, please email us using the links located in the show description. We hope you'll join us again next time.
This podcast is provided as a service of Latham & Watkins LLP. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and Latham & Watkins LLP, and you should not send confidential information to Latham & Watkins LLP. While we make every effort to assure that the content of this podcast is accurate, comprehensive, and current, we do not warrant or guarantee any of those things. And you may not rely on this podcast as a substitute for legal research and/or consulting a qualified attorney. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for engaging a lawyer to advise you on your individual needs. Should you require legal advice on the issues covered in this podcast, please consult a qualified attorney. Under New York's Code of Professional Responsibility, portions of this communication contain attorney advertising. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Results depend upon a variety of factors unique to each representation. Please direct all inquiries regarding the conduct of Latham & Watkins attorneys under the New York's disciplinary rules to Latham & Watkins LLP, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, New York, New York, 10020. Phone number 1-212-906-1200.